when you're learning the biological levels, starting with the smallest living unit, the cell, and working your way up, it starts with the cell, tissue, organ system, organism, and can go on from there. The level that stands out to us the most is maybe not being the most intuitive, is tissue. For one thing, not everything living has tissue. Not every living thing has an organ or organ system for that matter either, but they are still considered an organism. For example, a bacterium, a single-celled organism, doesn't have tissue. It goes without saying it doesn't have organs or organ systems either, but it is an organism. In the phylum Porifera, which has animals known as sponges, they don't have true tissues. So what is tissue? True tissue. Tissue is made up of a group of cells that work together and serve a function together. And not only that, but the cells in a specific tissue group tend to have similar structure and have similar embryonic origin. And in humans and many other animals too, there are 4 major types of tissues: epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous. Our focus will be on these 4 tissue types in humans, their general structure and function. But to emphasize, you can have entire textbook chapters, multiple chapters, devoted to each of these tissue types, so check out our video description for further reading to learn more. In our general tour, let's start with epithelial tissue, also referred to as epithelium. There are 2 major forms of this: surface epithelium, or surface epithelial tissue. Imagine the lining of the esophagus. And glandular epithelium, or glandular epithelial tissue. Imagine glands in the body. In most cases with surface epithelial tissue, we'll get to glandular a little later, we would see the epithelial cells themselves connected closely to each other with cell junctions. And the cells could have different shapes. Just some examples, they could be squamous, cuboidal, or columnar. I want to mention this variety because you know how you tend to visualize a cell with a perfect little circle nucleus? It makes it easy for diagrams, but the nucleus in many cells often isn't a perfect little circle, and you'll see that the nucleus shape can differ in these squamous, cuboidal, or columnar cell shapes. All of these cell shapes can differ based on function. Along with shape, the number of layers can vary. Surface epithelial tissue can be simple, 1 cell thick, or stratified, 2 or more cell layers thick. That means you could classify it as simple squamous or stratified squamous, simple cuboidal or stratified cuboidal, simple columnar or stratified columnar, and there's more classification than those examples. Now, glandular epithelial tissue is a little different. If you remember from our endocrine system video, endocrine glands can make hormones. Glands can make other things too. For example, if you're talking about exocrine glands can make saliva or sweat, breast milk, or mucus. Glandular epithelial tissue is going to be a little different from surface epithelial tissue. Exocrine glands can develop from surface epithelium that is folded inwards. There are a variety of structures you can find for these. The epithelial tissue for endocrine glands can be very diverse, but endocrine glands are ductless as they generally release hormones directly into the bloodstream. Let's talk about function now for epithelial tissue. We need to introduce its polarity to help. When we say polarity here, we are referring to 2 different surfaces in epithelial tissue. You have one surface called the basal surface. It is ultimately attached to connective tissue. Then you have another surface, the apical surface. That is the exposed part. It might be lining an organ, or in the case of skin, maybe outside of the body. That apical surface can vary in epithelial tissue as the surface is related to its function. Because, see, the epithelial tissue can form linings. For example, they may line the bladder. The characteristic of the apical surface may allow for stretching, in the case of lining the bladder, or maybe thicker, such as the epidermis of the skin, offering protection. Also, still on skin, as an example, the epithelial tissue can be important for sensory receiving. Despite not being vascular, epithelial tissue can have nerve fibers, which helps for that sensory receiving. Epithelial tissue can also be involved with absorption. In fact, many that do tend to be thin tissue and have an apical surface with lots of microvilli, which can help with absorption. Think small intestine. Some epithelial tissue have cilia, like what lines your airway and helps sweep pathogens or dust away from the airway or towards the throat. Epithelial tissue can also have the function of secretion, as was mentioned with glandular epithelium. And if you ever saw our excretory system and the nephron video, you know that the glomerulus needs to filter some things out and some things through. That has epithelial tissue involved in that filtering. Okay, so forming linings, protection, sensory reception, absorbing, secreting, filtering. These are just some functions that are highly dependent on how the epithelial tissue is structured. It's important that it is so diverse, as we mentioned, and as a bonus about epithelial tissue, in many cases, it can even regenerate. Important if it gets damaged. So let's move on to the next tissue type, connective tissue. And it's a perfect one to do next because epithelial tissue, as we mentioned, has a basal surface that is ultimately attached to connective tissue. So remember how we said that generally surface epithelial tissue tends to consist of closely connected cells, touching cell to cell. Yeah, well, it's not really that structure for connective tissue. Let me explain why. You know how we always say that tissue is made up of cells? That's not wrong, but for connective tissue, it's a lot more than just cells. Connective tissue does have many cells, like fibroblasts and fibrocytes, for example, but it also has this whole extracellular matrix, ECM, made up of all the stuff that the cells here make. Stuff that is not alive, stuff that includes ground substance, which is often a hydrated mix of water and other macromolecules like proteoglycans, for example, and fibers, like collagen fibers or elastic fibers, for example. The big key concept is that it's not that the other tissues don't have an ECM, they do, but connective tissue really stands out because the ECM plays a huge role, as it can form a structure that is hard, like something you'd find in bone, or something more fluid. Now, looking at big general categories for this type of tissue, we can lump connective tissue into connective tissue proper, supportive connective tissue, and fluid connective tissue. Starting with connective tissue proper, which makes it sound fancy, but it's a classic type that differs from other special types like supportive connective tissue and fluid connective tissue. Connective tissue proper may be loose connective tissue or dense connective tissue. Usually loose means the fibers are more loosely arranged, and dense means the fibers are more densely arranged, often bundled. Connective tissue proper has fibroblast and often other cell types too. Let's talk about the ECM. The fibers in the ECM could vary. For example, collagen fibers are common, many have elastic fibers, and the ground substance. Again, the gel-like substance that tends to have proteoglycans and other macromolecules depending on type. On that note, there are a lot of subcategories of connective tissue proper that we're not exploring in depth, but those subcategories have different structures and functions that vary. Functions might be involved with cushioning organs. Consider connective tissue proper found under many surface epithelial tissues. Or they might help resist forces. Consider tendons and ligaments, which are examples of connective tissue proper. Moving out of connective tissue proper, we can look at supportive connective tissue, which includes bone and cartilage. For bone tissue, it has cells like osteoblasts and osteocytes. The ECM is going to be rigid, makes sense for bone, a mineralized ground substance, and collagen fibers. Bone tissue is going to be ideal for support. Cartilage has cells like chondroblasts and chondrocytes. Looking at the ECM, its ground substance is a gel-like matrix with a major emphasis on the proteoglycans. And examples of fibers in the ECM are collagen fibers and sometimes elastic fibers, depending on the area, which can offer elasticity. Generally, cartilage offers support, and with the help of its ground substance, it can also provide cushioning. Moving into fluid connective tissue, we have blood. It's sometimes weird to think of blood as tissue, but it is a fluid tissue. It's got cells like red blood cells and white blood cells, also platelets, which are cell fragments. The ECM includes plasma and, assuming unclotted, no visible fibers. If you remember, blood has all kinds of functions, carrying gases, oxygen and carbon dioxide, carrying nutrients, removing waste. Lymph can be considered another fluid connective tissue. You might remember learning about lymph in our lymphatic system video. Assuming unclotted, as we did with blood, the ECM has no visible fibers. Lymph fluid is derived from interstitial fluid. And examples of cells in lymph? White blood cells. Lymph has important immune function and can also deliver substances to the blood. So overall, connective tissue has a common function theme, lots of support. Not every function is direct support, but support is a big theme with connective tissue, the great connector. Now, let's talk about moving. Muscle tissue. It's actually a lot more than just movement. Structure-wise, muscle tissue is made up of muscle fibers. These fibers are the muscle cells, and they have a structure that aids in their function, which we'll get into now with the three major types of muscle tissue. Cardiac muscle tissue. Like its name suggests, it's in the heart and critical for the heart to be able to contract. The muscle fibers are branched and striated or striped. Most of these muscle fibers have one nucleus, sometimes two. At the ends of the fibers, you'll find something called intercalated disc. The intercalated disc connect the muscle fibers together, and they're key players in allowing the cardiac muscle tissue to contract in an organized, wave-like pattern. This muscle tissue control is involuntary. That is, you do not consciously control it. Probably for the best. Smooth muscle tissue, it's smooth. It doesn't have striations or stripes. Each fiber has one nucleus, and they are spindle-shaped, meaning they are wide in the middle, and then they taper at both ends. You can find them in the walls of the digestive system, arteries and veins, the bladder, and more. They're involuntary, which means you don't have conscious control of them. For example, they might have a function involving moving something along, such as food. Skeletal muscle tissue. This is the one you often think of with the biceps or triceps because skeletal muscle is what attaches to bone or skin and is involved with voluntary control, meaning you can consciously control it. You can choose to pick up that biology textbook. If you could zoom in to see these, skeletal muscle fibers are striped or striated. The fibers are long cylinders that are multinucleated, fancy term for multiple nuclei. Generally, different muscle tissue types have some characteristics in common to mention. The tissue can stretch or extend, extensibility. It can retract back to its starting length, elasticity. Muscle tissue also has excitability. Excitability means these cells have the ability to be stimulated, and in the case of muscle tissue, their membranes can have electrical changes and send action potentials. Muscle tissue also has the ability to contract, or contractility. And all of this will bring us to our last tissue type to cover, nervous system tissue. Because the nervous system, which includes the brain, the spinal cord, and all the nerves around, has an important role in stimulating many muscles to contract. Nervous tissue has a major cell type known as neurons and also glial cells. There are different types of neurons, but to focus on general neuron structure, you have the cell body, the nucleus and most other organelles are there. There are dendrites. Generally, these branch structures are where signals are received. You have an axon. I like to think away axon because axons are the fiber where normally a signal will be carried to some other cell. The junction area where the neuron will be communicating with another cell is called a synapse. We have an action potential video that talks about how neurons transmit their electrical signal to other cells. And the other cell type we mentioned, glial cells, or you can call them glia. When I was a student and read that they were supporting cells, I don't think the word supporting emphasized to me at the time how essential they really are. Structurally, there was a lot of emphasis on how they actually help the neurons connect in place. The word glia in Greek means glue. But glia have huge roles and are so much more than that. Some glial cells keep a balance of certain chemicals in the space between cells, essential for signaling, and maintain the blood-brain barrier, which keeps a lot of substances in the body from getting into the nervous system. Some glial cells make myelin, which goes around the axons of neurons as something called a myelin sheath, insulates the axon and transferring of the signal. Some glial cells produce cerebrospinal fluid, which is protective to the brain and essential for homeostasis, as well as many other critical functions. Some glial cells have important immune function in the nervous system. These are all just a few examples. Together, neurons and glial cells make up nervous tissue that is critical for sending signals throughout the body. So now, 3 last things we want to mention. Number 1. Remember how at the beginning we said a tissue is made up of cells that work together and serve a function together? And not only that, but the cells in a specific tissue group tend to have similar structure and have similar embryonic origin. To expand on that a bit, there are 3 major germ layers in embryonic development: ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm. Epithelial tissue can develop from all 3 layers. Connective and muscle tissue, generally with some exceptions, develop from the mesoderm, and nervous tissue, generally with some exceptions, develops from the ectoderm. But there's a lot more to explore about that, and the topic of germ layers needs its own video. Number 2, just as we emphasize in our body systems video about how organs and the systems work together, so do body tissues. Body tissues do not work in isolation. For example, take a muscle in the arm. Yes, the muscle consists of skeletal muscle tissue, but it is also supported by connective tissue and nervous tissue. It has blood vessels that run through the muscle that are lined with epithelial tissue. All 4 tissues involved in that example, they are all working together. Number 3, you might have noticed that we said that generally epithelial tissue has the ability to regenerate if damaged. That's a characteristic of this tissue. So you might be curious, what about the other tissue types? Well, it can vary. For example, some types of connective tissue can regenerate. Bone connective tissue can regenerate after a fracture, while cartilage tends to heal more slowly and generally has less of an ability to regenerate. And in the muscle tissue category, skeletal muscle tissue generally has some regenerative properties, but less so for cardiac muscle tissue. In most cases, nervous tissue in the brain and spinal cord has limited ability to repair or regenerate after injury. However, research continues and therapies that could help this continue to be explored. Well, that's it for the Amoeba Sisters, and we remind you to stay curious.